Paul, delighted to see you. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
For the audience that don't know you, tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I've been in the energy industry about 25 years, I think now. I was originally with Centrica, and so I set up and ran part of their energy management group, the Accord Energy Trading Team. I then went to Canada and set up and became president of their Canadian operations. I left that and set up a private equity firm in Canada. Came back to the UK, joined npower, became the CEO of npower, and was then on the executive committee for RWE, and I was responsible for B2C, for digital, and I was on the innovation board. Then I left that in 2015, invested in some small companies, one of which was Electron. Slowly got more and more involved, and I've stepped in to be CEO since March 2018.
Let's talk about Electron in a moment. Let's talk about you. So,
Yeah.
What's your background? Are you an engineer? How did you get into energy?
No, so I actually started off in the city, and I did risk
You
management
just
and
stayed there.
financial settlement. No, I've had much more fun here. So I actually started off in risk management, and I did corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions, and that's really what I was doing for.
What attracted you to energy? Because you could have just stayed, with all respect, you could have stayed in a very interesting and financially incredibly rewarding world.
Yeah, bizarrely, at the age of 24, when I was incredibly mature, I made the decision. I kind of sat there and said, look, I don't want to spend my whole life making money for people who've already got money. I actually wanted to do something that was related to the real economy.
Right.
And so I actively went out to look for a role, and I joined, at that time, British Gas to be in their treasury, and I did corporate finance and risk management for them, and that led on to acquisitions and mergers, and I finally...
So in a funny way, even though most of us now, the press will hammer the energy world as being full of fat cats and all that, you saw that actually there is an altruistic side to energy that appealed to you more than the pure kind of financial world that you were in.
Absolutely, and I think even today we can get hung up on a lot of the other sort of the media issues, but think about what we're doing really. Probably the biggest challenge that we have as a planet is climate change. And energy is absolutely at the center of that. And so affecting that transition, getting more renewables onto the system, getting electric vehicles, all of this, battery, solar, storage, all of these things are really about changing the way we live our lives and creating a better climate. So that's still exciting to me. And 25 years on, I still find the energy market amazing.
When you joined, obviously two big corporates, Centrica and then obviously to RW. Let's talk about RW and when you were boss of npower. What was it like being the boss of a big six, where you have this incredible pressure of change, government legislation that's driving things, and yet so much criticism about how bills are worked out? Did you feel that you, not just as a boss, but you as a voice of the industry, that it wasn't being heard about the decency that we know exists in the energy sector? It's very portrayed as uncaring and simply about making money and putting the prices up with people who are poor.
So I think there is a media line that was also also worked politically, I think, which was that if you were one of the big six, it was the right thing to bash them, and that was the easy thing to do. And if you really think about that for a second and go behind that, people can get hung up about executive pay, and I'm not saying there aren't issues, but actually beneath those organisations are thousands and thousands of people who come in every day wanting to do the right thing. And they are doing the right thing, whether it means keeping the lights on, checking the lines, making sure the system balances, getting the bills out. I mean, they're trying to do the right thing. We don't always get it right. We didn't always get it right. I think npower had its own issues relating to the billing systems, and I absolutely accept that. So I think that for the vast majority of people in the energy industry, I think they found it quite tough, the negative environment. Having said that, I mean, let's be clear. I think that there are some things that needed to change that hadn't changed, and I think they're having to change now because technology is changing so quickly that those big companies are having to change, and the threat of new entrants that are coming into the market is forcing people to do things differently. And I think, in a sense, that's a good thing. And it applies to whether you're in the media market or in the energy market or in the hotel business. You have to adapt to the technology and the change that's happening.
Did you find that there was enough defence of the energy sector? Because I remember that time when so you were there, 2015. Ed Miliband was talking about the energy price cap, which, funnily enough, now the Tories have taken up, and there was a lot of kind of, as you say, bashing, but there wasn't much robust defence. Do you look back and think, with regret, that you didn't stand up enough for, as you say, the thousands of people who do a good job, and the fact that actually, if people looked at it, their bills were fairer? I think the energy sector had a problem communicating.
Totally. But I think you've also got to realise that, you know, we did a process, actually. I launched something at NPower called Energy Explained, and we actually broke down the bill and explained what was happening to the bill and why costs were going up. And partly that was to do with government policy. And actually, that wasn't a message that the government really wanted to hear at the time. And actually, there was a lot of people who didn't want to hear that. It didn't feed in well. At the same time, you've got to realise that the energy bill is probably your second biggest bill after your mortgage. It lands on the mat or in your email now. And actually, you don't really understand it. You don't feel you've got control of it. Prices go up when you see you don't really understand. And so for most people, it's actually a bit of a mystery. And so we didn't do enough as an industry, I think, to educate people and to give that breakdown of the bill and explain what was driving it. And that's probably an industry thing.
Moving forward, you talked about technology, and I want to explore that more importantly. When you were starting your career, there really wasn't much pressure on the environmental side. It was a bit of a kind of wistful thing. As your career developed, the big change with EMR particularly, you know, the whole kind of carbon push. Are we transitioning now fully because we've closed down things like the power stations that used to run? Or do you think we're still sort of playing lip service to it because we're still taking lots of gas in and we're moving the chess pieces around? Or do you actually think we're in the middle or starting, maybe not in the middle, but starting our proper transition?
No, look, so I think the transition, there is no doubt about it, that transition is happening. Absolutely. And actually it's driven by two factors. One is the reality of the climate change that we're seeing, and that is being driven into people's consciousness by the weather changes and the erratic weather nature of weather. And I think the second thing is technology. So the reality is that the price of renewables now is cheaper than building gas. It's certainly cheaper than building nuclear. And so the fact is that solar and battery are going to become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And these are technologically curves that are just going to drive down the price. Yeah. And so, we're definitely at that horse car moment. We've moved from horses, we're going to cars. I actually think that's energy transition 1.0, which I think is now set and will run. I think the next challenge for the energy transition is actually how do you integrate all of these different devices, all the renewables, which are interruptible, all of the electric vehicles which are going to be coming on, all the battery and solar. How do you integrate that into one system that allows you to get the lowest possible cost and allows you to have a reliable, balanced system? And that will be the challenge. And I think you will see in the next couple of years, country by country saying, look, renewables are happening, we know that. The question is, how do we get to 60%, 70%, 80%, 90% of our energy mix being renewables? So look, I think the first argument's gone, it's happening. The second argument is how much of the energy mix can be renewables.
While we're recording this, Donald Trump is here, obviously, forget the balloon and all that, but he's shifted the energy conversation in America. Do you think that is a message that actually in certain developing nations they might be thinking, actually we still do have coal, maybe we should go clean coal, but we can use it? And your aspirational vision that we're all shifting globally may be derailed at some point.
So I think there's a couple of things about that. First of all, Trump has his view as the federal level, but actually both at the state level and in the city level, there's a very strong pushback. And actually what's being implemented is still a drive towards decarbonisation. And the other question is, as a business person, Trump should realise, actually you can't bring coal back, it's not effective and cost effective versus renewables. Then if you look at the developing world and you look at China, China has been very clear about the drive to clean tech. And the reason they're doing that is a number of things. One is they've got their own environmental issues with smog and health and all of the other things they know they've got to deal with. But the second thing is they realize, in the same way they've captured the solar panel market, they realize the battery market, the EV market, the smart grid market is a developing new market that they can own because of their scale. So they are going to be driving for it. And then if you look at India, and then you look at possibly North Africa and parts of Africa, again, solar is going to be the cheapest form of energy. So I think it's the economics matched with the desire for the public to get to a cleaner carbon position that will drive this.
Let's move on to Electron. What is Electron? Tell us about it.
So Electron really is set up to solve this problem. And the problem that we've seen is, how do you integrate hundreds of thousands of devices, whether those devices be cars, electric vehicles, batteries, solar panels, IoT devices. How do you get those hundreds of thousands of devices that we will have in the system to play their full role in balancing the grid?
Right.
Up until now, we've had a grid which has been very one-directional from the top. Somebody controls it, it all goes down one way. Now we've got bidirectional flows, we've got interruptible wind resources or solar, and we've got storage resources. Somehow we need an architecture, a market which allows those assets to play for buyers and sellers. And what Electron has developed, and it happens to be on blockchain, is a platform, a trading platform, which allows new prices, assets to come in and to match for flexibility. So at the moment in the flexibility markets, we don't have any locational pricing. We don't price for inertia. The capacity mechanism actually is fairly rigid. And there's lots of issues around that. And so what we want to do is create a new market, because that new market will enable those assets to become and be adopted and play their full role, and that will reduce the carbon costs for economies.
In effect, are you trying to create a new energy exchange, a new trading?
Totally. It's an energy exchange, but it's driven at the system operator kind of work. So if that £1 billion that National Grid, the system operator, spends today, we think 800 million of that could go through a traded market. 200 million would still be required for going to gate closure, and the system operator would still do that. But actually, there's many more buyers and sellers that can be involved in that market of flexibility. And that's what we're doing. And
But isn't there a danger that as we move into this completely decentralized way of living, that you want to buy power and you need it very shortly, and your neighbour's got it, and we may be doing all of that trading and it's great and trendy Hoxton where we are in parts of London, but actually there's a need for someone to balance the fact that up in the Shires somewhere, someone will still need power. Do you think that this trading platform that you're creating will be biased towards people who are A, technologically smart, and B, where the demand is? And so in a way, like the old stamp equivalent of the first class stamp, it's easy to get a letter around in London, and then why do we still pay for something that's actually not worth sending all the way up to Scotland? How do you see that working?
So that's a really, really interesting question. So first of all, we think the important thing is to set price signals. So the fact is, at the moment on a capacity mechanism, there is no locational pricing, which is insane. The fact is today, if you're a VPP and you bid into the flexibility market, nobody really knows where that asset came from or what power was produced. So I think setting locational pricing is really important. Right. Now, our argument would be, we're setting locational pricing, it's a policy decision on how you adjust for that.
Yes.
And I think there's a very big question about this, which is, in the energy transition 2.0, as technology becomes a bigger thing, who are the winners and losers of this? I'm on the Fuel Poverty Committee for Government, and this is something that we're very concerned about. So I'll give you an example of it. Whether you have more and more people having embedded generation, it will mean that less kilowatts flow through the transmission and distribution network. Yeah. The transmission and distribution network is still going to have to be funded, and therefore we are going to have to move to a more fixed-based connection charge. So think of your BT line. Everybody pays their £19 a month. We're going to have to move that way. How does that affect people who are low users? Is that fair? So as Ofgem look at RIIO-2 and they look at the charging base, it's likely we're going to move to a connection charge as a higher position. And then it's going to be, how does that affect the feel poor and people who have low bills? How does it affect it if it's the people who are rich that have electric vehicles or can put solar and battery in their homes?
Absolutely.
But people who don't then end up getting differential pricing because they're not storing their energy at that time. So our view is we're not seeking to solve those problems. What we're seeking to do is create a market which creates price signals, which allows the market to help come in and solve some of them.
But you know as well as I do, the market won't. The market will go where the money is. So unless you have government intervention in this new thing you're creating, how do you protect?
Totally. So our view is let's set the price signals. If there's a constraint there because in the southeast everybody's driving around in electric vehicles and we've got the storage and here's a constraint, we should set a price signal because the distribution network then should say either I need to upgrade or I need to enter into a battery contract with somebody or I can send price signals for other people to manage their energy. The first thing is let's get a price signal. The second thing is how do you socialize issues and what does the government have to do? And actually I think it's super important that both BEIS and Ofgem look at this energy transition and think about who are the winners and losers in the system.
Where do you see your platform being in a few years' time?
So we are already working.
Do you think that people who are buying energy around the country will be going instead of the normal spot markets, and that's where they'll trade on this?
Absolutely. So we see the big buyers and sellers. So not the individual users. We think aggregators will be the roles. We think the system operator, the DSOs, which will increasingly becoming trading houses, will all be using systems like this to balance. And so we're already working with some of the biggest names in the country, National Grid, EDF, Shell, etc., to develop these markets. And what has really amazed me has been the demand that we've now seen for this platform internationally. So literally we have had people calling us up, other system operators from around the globe, saying, we've got the same problem. We don't know how to integrate these. Can you come and talk to us? So we are in active conversations with 5 other countries already to talk with their system operators, their trading houses, their suppliers about how our platform could help their markets.
Do you envision the future being then that actually where we are right now, you have an end user, big end user, forget the domestic, let's just talk commercially for now, big end user, and they may buy direct from a supplier or they might buy through a broker, or they can go onto the market themselves, whatever. Do you think that actually what you're planning and what you're trying to develop here with Electron breaks that model completely? So that, are you going to be selling to individuals, or do you still see your trading being done by those big, as you said, at present, aggregators and big users and big suppliers? Or does it not actually defeat the whole object, which is, the liberalisation of buying should be at anyone's?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there. I think actually for big users, for the very big users, people like Sainsbury's and the water companies, they obviously have their expertise and they will get more involved in this because of the locational pricing. So those players will play directly in the marketplace. For others, I think it will be through aggregators. So if you are somebody who is rolling out charging posts now, or you're somebody who's rolling out batteries, or you're a supplier, you're going to be offering your consumer a tariff or a deal that says, if you allow me to adjust your battery during these hours, I'll save you X amount of money. Switch on to my smart tariff. So actually, people have talked about the death of the utility.
Yes.
I don't buy into that. I think utilities are challenged because essentially you're going to see new technology coming in which will reduce demand for their product. But actually, they are still going to be a major conduit to the customer. Another area that people have talked a lot about is peer-to-peer, and could the peer-to-peer market disrupt it? Actually,
which is the whole essence of what the blockchain will be, and then
exactly. So when we've looked at peer-to-peer, we actually think, what are you trying to do? How many times or how many people are there really that are taking energy? Somebody's producing excess energy at solar at 3 p.m, and there's somebody else who's borrowing it. Actually, the number of desynchronized loads aren't that big. The second issue is, part of what you're avoiding is the distribution charges. If those distribution charges change and become more fixed in their nature, as we talked about earlier on, then actually your ability to arbitrage that goes away. You're still going to have to bill. You're still going to have to provide government incentives or taxes. So actually, we think peer-to-peer is going to be much more limited than people think.
So you still think it'll be done big block trading, but just using a more flexible platform?
I think our market will create flexibility trading, but I think the suppliers will be a major be a major role still to play in them.
Who are your competitors out there right now? Because you can't be the only ones doing it.
There are other people who are looking at creating these flexibility markets. Nobody else is doing it on blockchain in this kind of way. There's one or two other companies that are looking at this same problem and are coming at it from a different direction.
So you think there is a push towards a changing trading market?
Totally, there has to be, because absolutely the technology is coming. Nothing is going to stop solar battery coming and electric vehicles. So the question then is, how do you integrate it? And the distribution networks plan for 10, 20 years. You haven't got that time to plan. People are going and buying this stuff and they're going to be driving it, and the prices come down, it's going to happen.
What about things like assets? This is the thing that I asked a fairly senior member of the energy sector the other day and didn't really know the answer. Who's going to own assets in the future? Because no one wants to. They're massive, they're cumbersome, they're huge investment, and they've got huge running costs. And yet, we can't have, as you well know as a former big six box, you can't have the entire, energy need of this country on distributed batteries and renewable at present. So there will be assets in your future. Who's going to own those?
So it's interesting. So if you look at the asset position of, you're still going to have the grid wires and distribution as an asset position. In countries where you don't have enough solar or enough wind in the middle of winter, you're going to need a backup supply.
Absolutely.
And therefore you are going to need some sort of big generation. That big generation is likely to be gas, it's likely to be recip, it's unlikely to be CGTT because you're not going to get enough running hours. So somebody's going to have to get paid to do that. And we're seeing a lot of gas recips coming into the marketplace. So I think that is the model. They are just going to have to earn their economic return over that period of time, and they're going to have to get paid merchant risk to do that. But then the other part of it is actually...
So you don't think those people will be suppliers? They'll literally just be running little assets?
I think there will be people there may be suppliers who've done gas recips, but you're seeing the market come in for that. And if you look at the profile, as battery storage becomes cheaper and develops for longer, then the number of hours that you need to run CGTT get reduced. And I don't think CGTT will be economic.
Do you think that this change, which you say is already underway, will have us in a very different world in terms of skills? So there'll be the people who are super technically literate, people who are real kind of, dare I say, nerds for this sort of stuff who understand it, and the rest of us will be left behind. So isn't there inherent danger that the blockchain technologies limit the accessibility? Because you've got to get your head around it and you've got to know what you're doing. Whereas most people who've worked in the energy industry can see a simple trading platform. Or do you believe that the technology actually makes it simpler?
So I think it's really important. People, as soon as you mention the blockchain word, they
some
kind
of the energy managers,
oh my God,
absolutely.
What are they talking about? And they think Bitcoin, they think of using the energy of Iceland and all of this stuff. What we need to do is not talk about blockchain. We need to talk about outputs and outcomes. If I can develop a system which is cheaper, which is faster, which allows the integration of assets, everybody gets that. Now tell me how you're going to do it. It just happens to be on blockchain. The reality is for most users, they won't see any difference at all. These blockchains will run in the background, their actual interface.
So we're getting too hung up on this kind of crypto energy and all that stuff.
Actually blockchain will be really pushed in the financial services market, and it'll be pushed by the banks and the clearinghouses who will use it to save costs. The majority of us will never ever see it and never have to know about it. It will just be happening to get rid of those overhead costs.
Do you think in 5 or 6 years, I'll have a little app on my phone saying, oh, do you know what, my neighbour wants to buy some energy and I know you've got some solar panel energy, so would you like to sell it?
I think there's going to be a whole bunch of different models. My own view is that the better model will be somebody who says, I'm going to take control and take care of you for your solar, for your electric vehicle, for your battery, because I know how you live your life. You're going away on a holiday break, I'm going to use your battery to charge and discharge, and when you get back, here's £10 that you wouldn't have made. So it's going to be those interactive. I don't think people are so nerdish that they want to know everything going on. There's a very small percentage. What they want is simple and easy to understand. And actually, as the energy market becomes more complex, in the sense of electric vehicles, storage and solar, actually they want somebody who's just going to manage it for them.
Will there be suppliers in 5, 10 years' time?
Absolutely. I think there'll be suppliers. I think they're going to need to change. I think they're going to need to adapt. I think they need to work with electric vehicles, work with storage, and they're going to need to be able to use their risk management skills that many of them have to provide these time of use tariffs that really work for consumers.
Are you having fun?
Yeah, having fun, love it. I
can
think
tell by
it's
the
at the
beard,
front
is
end
your-
of it.
the relaxed.
Exactly. No, look, I am. You know, I think it's.
But it's a very
at the
big
forefront.
shift, isn't it, for someone who ran such a massive organisation to come to this
Yeah.
small kind of little start-up and be part of this big, sharp end of technology.
Yeah, but then you look at things and you think, we're at the energy transition, where,
Yeah.
which side of that do you want to be, right or left? Do you want to be a big incumbent who's got a lot of changes to go through? They're still going to survive and still be there, but there's a lot of heartache to get through to that change. Or would you rather be a small, nimble company that can do things quickly and can get ahead of things? And I just made the decision this was more fun than that.
But you look like you're having fun.
Yeah, it's great. Enjoying
Thanks
it.
very much for your time, Paul.
Brilliant. Great. Really enjoyed it.